Yeah. See, I mean, I do not typically.
He needs an apple.
Yeah, me too, I'll get there eventually.
Okay. What's wrong?
I don't know. I did. Yeah, I did.
Oh.
Sorry, guys, we're just trying to get my computer to actually display it up on the screen, and it doesn't want to do that now all the time.
Wait a second.
Yeah, but it's not showing what his screen's actually showing.
On your computer, click the screen in the bottom right corner. You got a share screen.
Well, I did that. They can see my screen on there, but maybe it's down here somewhere. Which I've never had to do before, but I'm happy to look. Sorry, guys, those of you on Zoom. Just hang on a second. We'll be right with you. All right. Wow, we got a whole crew coming in.
You have a presentation on.
No. The agreement, the actual disclosure. I'd have to re-log into everything. Yeah, I don't either because I don't know what this is doing.
What's in your flash here?
I just took that off.
What's this?
Oh, that's my this. Well, that's not the same. That's the only one. Yeah, that's the only one I have. Sorry, guys, we're just trying to troubleshoot here on Zoom. Give me a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, that's weird. That's my background, but that doesn't help us.
Can you stop screen sharing?
Yes, I can stop screen sharing. And now I see Melissa Sanford's smiling face. Okay.
Sorry, Ben, you weren't smiling.
That's right. Okay. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Amanda is going to have to bring me her computer, and then we will try and start again because for some reason my computer does not want to cast the TV, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So we're going to go ahead and get started. How many of you guys are super nervous or excited about the exclusive buyer agency agreement? Anybody? Yeah, scared, excited? Has anybody used one yet? From day one, when?
Several times.
Yeah. The updated one? Well, there's a 3-page document. That's the one that we're going to go over, and I'm going to cast it as soon as Amanda logs into the Zoom. I'll log out, and then everybody stay where you are. Oh. You hear how I get spoken to? This, just so you know, this happens all the time, but I'm glad that you saw this abusive relationship we have here. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the lawsuit, buyer agency, and all that fun stuff as Amanda helps get set up here. You've heard probably tons of different things about buyer agency and what's going on with it, right? So as of right now, we are preparing that as of July, we are using buyer agency agreements. You should start using them now, get comfortable with them, but definitely by July. Now, the Department of Justice has come out and said a few different things about commissions, and they don't think that we've gone far enough as far as our agreement with NAR and the lawsuits. So I'm teaching you on this today, and I cannot tell you that it won't change in the future, right? So what you're going to learn today, use it for now. As of July, it could be different. All right. Any questions before we get started on like specific things you want me to cover? Nope. Okay.
Because I know if it's in the MLS and they're offering, let's say 3% in the MLS. But on your buyer agency, you only have 2.5%. So you only get the 2.5%.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so what if you have the buyer sign a 3%, but tell them, okay, if they offer 2.5%, are we allowed to adjust their buyer agency?
You're not really allowed to adjust the buyer agency agreement up or down once you have the agreement. It is supposed to be what they're going to pay you. You've negotiated up.
So why?
Well, commissions are negotiable, but if the Department of Justice gets their way, the seller will not be allowed to pay a buyer's agent at all. Yeah.
On buyer agency agreement.
Yeah. Up front.
We know that we're gonna get 2.5%. We can't say, okay, you don't have to pay the other half.
So right now, the answer is no. And the reason I say that is simply because of this. So for those of you on Zoom that maybe didn't hear Diana's question, is if you negotiate a percent of a commission, so let's just say it's a 3% commission with your buyer, and that's what you have signed on the buyer agency agreement, but all of a sudden you go to a property and that particular property happens to be offering a buyer agent's comp and it's 2.5%. Could you not just accept the 2.5% and forego the other 0.5%, right? Because you're negotiating. And the reason I say I don't think that you're going to be allowed to do that, and the answer would be no, is because if you do it for one person and then you don't do it for another person, and I'm not saying that you would discriminate, but let's just say it's one of the 7 protected classes or 9 protected classes in Ohio, and you subconsciously just offer it because they're a nice person, right? Well, what happens if you don't do that to everybody and all of a sudden somebody else finds out that you've done that? Don't you think that could be just discrimination?
Saying that it's a bummer that like.
No, the whole thing's a bummer.
2.5%, but they're offering 3 and you lose out on 0.5%.
Well, the interesting thing is we don't even know what's going to happen to that 0.5%, just so you're aware. So in the reverse of that, if you are offering a buyer broker compensation of 3%, but the buyer's agent has negotiated a 2.5%, they're not allowed to get paid more than the 2.5%. I don't know where that other percent goes. I'll just be very honest. I don't know if the seller gets to keep it. I don't know if the listing agent. Well, that's.
I mean, the listing side.
The listing side's gonna know. Okay, we are set up, so let me, I can just, right.
If you agree for 3%, you're 2.5%.
There you are.
Thank you.
Can't use
Is my
your mouse,
battery
but you're
gonna
good.
work?
You're at full battery after
Okay.
that, right?
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, I guess before we start to get too many conversations going, I don't know that any of us know the answer to the question that you're asking specifically, other than to say, I cannot imagine that you would start reducing your commission after you've already agreed to something with the buyer. If the buyer was comfortable with the 3%, why would you reduce it to 2.5% and accept that? Is my first question. Secondly, or my first answer. And secondly, you could discriminate not intentionally doing that. But if you start doing that with people and it's a friend that all of a sudden starts listing or working with you and they say, oh, well, she did this for me. Well, why didn't you do it for them? So to me, it's a very slippery slope. I don't like special deals. Go ahead. Sorry.
So on the current listing agreement, there's like the section where you can put like the buyer either consents or does not consent.
We're going to go over that. Yep.
Okay. So as of right now, we need to be, well, right now we can still accept more, correct? Up until July.
You can still accept more until July, yes.
And then starting from July, we'll have to put like, they do not consent. Correct?
Right. Well, no, you still can consent to getting, I'll cover that.
Okay.
I'll cover that. Go ahead.
So I have been using it for years. The only time that I have ever had to go down my commission is at closing when they didn't have the money for commission. So what would happen to that now? Like, you're at closing, they're $1,000 short.
Are you talking on a listing side, they didn't have the money for the commission? So you've charged buyers a commission for years and you've received it on the settlement statement is what you're saying.
Then-
And if the buyer doesn't have the money, then you forego the commission. That's an interesting concept. I only say that because you've negotiated it up front with them. They are aware that they're being charged that percent or that fee. So why would you forego it?
Well, because they would have been able to close. So I'm just curious what would happen.
I guess they
When you
wouldn't
said about
close.
settlement,
I mean, essentially, like, I'm gonna try and answer as much as I can, but I'll be very honest, we are all in the same boat here. Like, I can train you on this agreement, but as far as like that question, if you're not supposed to negotiate, we're being told that once you commit to the 3%, 2.5%, whatever it is, you don't go back and renegotiate it later. So I don't know what would happen other than to say the buyer might have to borrow money from their cousin to come to closing. I mean, to pay you unless you're able to forgive it. And again, my question is at that point, why are we going to start forgiving commissions out of desperation when the only way we're going to get paid is through a buyer, right? I mean, potentially. So if you start foregoing your commission and just working with these people, so that would be my question. Go ahead.
What if we had the, if we have agreed to 2.5%, or excuse me, if we agreed to 3% and seller is only offering 2.5%, can't we just ask the buyer to make up the 5%?
You can double dip, and I'm going to go over it on this agreement. So that kind of goes back to her question. It's not considering double dipping. You just can't make more money than you agreed to on this form. So it doesn't matter where it's coming from, and I'll go over that, but you can't accept more. So in her case, like I said, if you only want to accept 2.5%, but you agreed on this form to 3%, you cannot get paid 3%. You can only get paid 2.5%. So what happens to that other percent? The 0.5%, I don't know the answer to that. But to Diana's point or question is, couldn't I just accept the 2.5% and forego the other half? Sure, you could, I would imagine is the right answer. But at the same time, I'm saying I would not do that. And I don't think you're going to be able to do that because you pre-negotiated. What's the purpose of it? I guess that's my question is, what's the purpose of a contract if we're not following them?
But I get that, but there's been times, even on the listing side, when repairs or things come up in a contract.
Sure they do.
And we lower our commission.
We do.
It happens. So I'm like, that's not gonna be a thing anymore, that you can do that?
What we're hearing is no, you're not. Once you agree to this commission, that's what you're agreeing to. That you're not going to be able to go back and cross it out and change it. Maybe they'll come up with an addendum. I don't know.
But when do you have to sign this agreement?
Yeah, so you have to sign this agreement before you ever meet with the client at a house, or when you first meet, just like the consumer guide, which would be terrible. So we're going to go over that too. Mike?
I know you don't know the answer, but is there any thoughts on how that's gonna be enforced? Before you show a house, you have to have a buyer agent. Is that something we have to upload into the MLS? Or I've just seen.
The MLS shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Well,
But yeah,
I
it's
just,
true.
how do
Just
you
like the
envision this
consumer
being,
guide.
okay, like I'll give you an example, consumer guide, we're supposed to present that in the first substantive meeting. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Somebody might get it signed later on, and that's what I'm saying, buyer agency. The law is it has to be signed, you know.
So Mike's question for those of you on Zoom, because I don't know if you guys can hear the questions, is how do we envision this being monitored or compliance purposes that you're supposed to get it signed the first time that you meet with a client? I guess that's a great question. Each company might do it a little bit differently. I can tell you that the law that's going to be, so we have House Bill 466, which we're trying to get passed right now. That is before you ever show a client a house, you have to get this agreement signed. Now, I don't know if that means that NAR is going to come up with some type of rule with grievance for the boards so that you can file a grievance against an agent if they don't do it. I don't know what the compliance is going to be. You're right. I don't have an answer because we haven't got that far.
Specific, or is that?
No, so we'll go over that. Why don't I start with the form? Maybe that'll answer some questions then, and then we'll go from there. How's that? Okay. All right. So right now we are using the Ohio Realtors. This is a 3-page document. I will tell you, I cannot guarantee that we will use this after July or that we will always use this form. The state of Ohio, the Ohio Realtors has made it very clear that they will not be coming up with a specific form that every brokerage has to use, nor will the Division of Real Estate. So that means that these can look different no matter what company you're at. That's going to be a problem because just so you're aware, ours may be an exclusive agreement. Somebody else's may be non-exclusive. Somebody else's, and I've seen one from Remax that says that you have to go to arbitration to get out of it. This one says that you just have to email the agent and say that you want removed from it and you no longer have an agency agreement in place. That might look different. And so I'll solicit some of your feedback after we go through this to kind of get what you guys like and dislike, simply because we need to make a decision as a company if we're coming up with our own or if we're going to be following what Ohio Realtors has. Okay.
Are we still doing consumer guides along with this?
Yeah, consumer guide has not changed.
So it's the same. Okay.
Yep,
So
consumer
both-
guide still has to be. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the idea about this and the reason I'm a little bit more excited about this, and I say excited because you go on a listing appointment and you sit at the person's kitchen table or wherever, and you actually talk to them, you give a full presentation. A seller is less apt to waste your time as opposed to a buyer. If we can get to a point where buyers are actually coming in and meeting with you in your office, or you're going to their home and meeting with them, and you're getting them pre-approved and you've walked them through what the title process looks like and the inspection process, you might have a lot less hiccups in a transaction because a buyer has an A to Z of what to expect, but also you have a client now that has actually got to meet you more than 5 seconds at a house and determine whether or not they liked you or you were worth the commission that they were going to pay you. So I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. It's a different way that we've ever worked before, but it's not bad. Okay. All right. So let's go over what I typically do in these, if you haven't been to the class before, is go over each box or paragraph as a whole. I don't talk about every single word in it, but I will go over it as a whole. So the first one is just saying that the agreement is between whoever the client is, right? So the biggest thing that you have to understand about these are no longer are you going to have those days where you go out and you show a house to, let's just say, an unmarried couple, and you get one person to sign the agreement, but really it's the other person that's buying the house, right? The consumer guide is signed by one of them, but it's the other person buying the house. And they're both decision makers, but essentially only one of those parties is on the loan and one of those is going to be on the deed. That means you need to understand who you're working with. So the line that for the section 1 and 2 or box 1 and 2 needs to be the client that's actually buying the house, the one that you are actually working with, not the spouse of that has no say in what's going on. So know who your client is, and get that name in there correctly. Yes.
Does it have 2 spots for 2 names?
You could have 2 different people. Yeah,
And
you could.
Would you have to redo it if they weren't on the loan?
Well, you don't have to redo it if they're not on the loan, but you want to make sure you have the right person that's buying is what I would say.
Okay.
So if I get 2 people's names on it, as long as I have a name on it that's buying, I should be covered just fine.
So what do you get? Because I'm pretty sure everybody's done this, when you have family members that are looking at a property for somebody out of state
Yeah.
and have them on the phone or something like that. What do you do?
So that, and that's why I say this is a good thing. Like, that's a business decision now for you as a business owner, as an agent, is to say, am I going to take my time to go show a house to a cousin of a cousin that lives out of state, that they're telling me what they want, but I don't know if that's what they want. I've never spoken to them. Why am I going to waste my time to go show a house to somebody that can't buy? So if you put that person's name on here that you showed the property to, and I'm sure it's going to happen, Diana, to your point, I'm sure it's going to happen. I wouldn't expect, if I were that agent, to get paid anything from that person because they're not the client, right? I mean, they're not the client. So I think that you're going to have to make that decision. Does it make sense for you to go show this property without talking to the actual buyer? It doesn't, in my opinion.
I would
Holly?
think that out of state buyer, if you're going to do it, and make sure they sign before.
And that's the thing. This doesn't say it has to be signed. It has to be signed in ink. It can be signed electronically. So if you have a person that is out of state in California, then you should be picking up the phone and calling that person and saying, I understand I'm showing your aunt a house on your behalf. I need to get this signed with you because you're actually the client. By the way, the consumer guide should be signed by you as well because you're the client. So that's why I'm saying it really prompts a very good conversation, and it kind of protects your time so that you don't have to be the one to be the bad guy to say, I can't go show you the house. I mean, Ohio law is telling you I need the client's signature and disclose that I would represent you in the transaction. So,
Changing expectations is what they're doing.
yeah. So get the person's name that is actually going to be on your loan or the buy side of it, whatever the case would be.
So not husband, wife, just, I always do that by default.
Yeah, you can get a husband and wife. I mean, you could put 15 names on here. As long as you have the name of the person that's buying, it really doesn't matter. And that's what I'm saying. If you have a husband and wife and you only put the husband's name on it, but he's on the loan and he's going to be on the deed, you have a relationship with that person. So if it happens to be one or two, the point is just to make sure you get the right name on there. That's all. Yeah. But I think it's going to be probably the next year is going to be a lot of trial and error. And I would say we should probably have masterminds around best practices about how you're seeing these being rolled out, questions your consumers asking, situations that you're running into. So maybe we'll look at doing something like that. Okay. But basically, paragraph 1 just says, whoever the buyer is that's going to be paying you, that's who you need to be on there. And then the purpose of this on line 6, I would say, you would put something like residential property in the state of Ohio, commercial property in the state of Ohio. You would put in Stark County. What I don't want you to do is put a specific address, because that does happen. And then unfortunately, you only have an agreement with that buyer for this one particular address. What good does that do you when they go shop somewhere else? It doesn't do you any good. So make sure you leave it as vague as possible, but you may have to get more specific with that cranky buyer that says, no, you're only showing me houses in Stark County. I've got another agent showing me houses in Cuyahoga County or down in Columbus that I'm working with. Because I'm sure you've been in this situation where you have a buyer coming into town that is saying, I'm not sure if I'm living here, if I'm living in Columbus or Toledo. I'm looking at all those places. Now, you could be the agent that's showing them in all those places, but hopefully you're familiar with the services that those communities offer to be able to answer questions. If not, you shouldn't be servicing them. All right. So then the term of this agreement, that's going to be negotiable as well. I would say in this current market, you probably want a 6-month time frame where you're working with people. That's what we used to do on listing agreements, was 6 months. It just makes sense because you don't know how long they're going to be shopping for, but it's negotiable. It could be 3 months. It could be 5 months. It could be 2 months. But I would say try and get at least 6 months. What I would caution you on, though, is this. If you think that you're going to get a buyer 12 months on one of these and you're going to hold them to it, remember this agreement says that you can get out of the agreement by emailing the client and they can do the same thing to you. So procuring cause is going to be something totally different than a buyer agency agreement. We also don't know, even though you have a term, if I go and I get this signed by a consumer and I start showing them houses and I ask them specifically, have you signed anything with any other agent? And they might say, no. And then I get a call when I go under contract that says, wait, that's my client. And I'm going to say, I don't know what to tell you because they signed my agreement. You might have one signed, but remember, this agreement is between the buyer and the brokerage. It is not between the other brokerage. So in a perfect world, if one of these was signed, another agent shouldn't be allowed to work with your consumer. That's not what's happening here. This is between the brokerage and the buyer. So the term of this is negotiable and you need to make sure it makes sense. Because I have seen agents, like I said, that will do a 12-month and then the client argues and emphatically that they didn't want to deal with them for 12 months. Well, you're not going to keep somebody in an agreement they don't want to be in. It's that simple. Okay.
What happens
Good.
if, like, there's 2 exclusive buyers agreements signed?
Yep.
Like if they sign 2 or multiple ones, and
Yep.
they're signing them all over,
Yep.
then what happens?
So Holly's asking the question for those of you on Zoom, what happens when you find out that there are multiple of these signed by a consumer, which is going to happen as well. And the answer to that is we really don't know, because it's going to, like I said, procuring cause is going to be something completely different than the buyer agency agreement. What we don't typically see are brokerages suing a client over a commission. Are we going to see that happen? We might, because the buyer agency agreement that says, hey, you signed this agreement with me and then you went and bought with a different brokerage. You owe this commission to me. I don't want to be the first broker to do it. I will say that. And I think it would damage the reputation. Realtors have already been in the headlines. I can imagine the next headline, real estate company sues buyer for not buying a house with them. Right? I mean, what's that going to look like? And then what buyer is going to want to work with a brokerage? Is it the right thing to do? Yeah, it's probably the right thing to do because you want to get paid for the work that you did. Unfortunately, the result of it is it could damage the reputation of the brokerage and all the agents at the
Well,
brokerage.
the agreements with the brokerage.
Yep.
And not the agent. What if Preston and I both have one signed and it's a legacy contract? Then how do you handle it?
Yeah, that's a great.
When you make a decision.
Well,
okay,
that would be a
sorry.
very unfair decision to have to make. So Gina asked the question. I mean, if you want to slide some greenbacks under my door at first, that'd be fine. Gina's asking the question. So if we have two people in the same brokerage, I mean, I would think that we should probably maybe take that to the ALC, but I'm thinking off the top of my head that the person that had it signed first, the first date would be the one that would get it, because to me, that would be the
Unless
most fair.
the procuring cost situation.
Well, the procuring cost situation, it doesn't happen when it's in the same brokerage, because the brokerage is the one that collects the commission. And so what we do internally doesn't matter. What I'm saying is you could have a Howard Hanna agent or a Cutler agent that shows a buyer a house that you have the buyer representation agreement with. Because to Mike's point, the consumer guide doesn't always get signed, right? Nobody always follows the law and gets the consumer guide signed at the very first opportunity or before they show up a property. So it's going to happen with the buyer representation agreement as well. And that's, to your point, who's going to monitor that? I imagine something's going to be coming, that somebody's going to be monitoring this since it's a rule. But to that point, what if I do show a house and I don't get one signed, and all of a sudden, Mike, you go show a house to these people, and you have an agreement signed, and then they call me again and I show them a house. And now I'm procuring cause really because I showed them the house, whether you have an agreement with them or not. That's where we're going to have litigation between brokerages, I'm sure.
Another problem, if we're using this Ohio contract, that says you just have to email.
Yep.
If other agents are, I can see this getting really ugly, because they're gonna inform their client, all you have to do is email them,
Well, that's what I'm saying. It could get ugly with procuring cause, because an agent is just going to say, well, if you just email them, you can get out of it, right? And then you're going to go look at another house. That's why I'm saying, I'm not promising you that we're keeping this one. I'm just saying to you that this is the one we have available to us at the moment. It doesn't make any sense right now for us to start developing a different one before July until we even understand what the rules are or are not going to be. It just doesn't make sense. We have one. No, we have one available to us. It's this one, the state of Ohio. The other one that we have from Keller Williams is probably from 2014 or 16 or whatever. It's so old, there's not enough information on there to make it legitimate. So meaning that it's not legal. You can't, you're not using it. It's not in dot loop. So if you have it, it's because you've kept it, but it's not in dot loop anymore.
It's gonna be the buyers, like, buyers are liars. And
Buyers are liars.
we
Mhm.
ask them, do you have an
That's right.
agency with anybody else? And they're gonna tell us no.
That's right.
And then what are we supposed to do?
But that's what I'm saying is the answer is we don't have the answer, because again, I say to you, if you have a buyer that comes to the property and lies to you and says, I didn't sign anything with anybody else, they sign an agreement with you. There's nothing in these agreements that say that we owe the other brokerage any money. There's nothing in the agreement that says that the buyer doesn't owe them money, but they would have to sue the buyer. That's not our problem. And that's going to be the problem, is it's not our problem as a brokerage. That's why I'm saying to you, be very careful with these, because at first it's going to be trial and error. You're going to get into a situation where a buyer lies to you and tells you that they didn't sign something with somebody else. Then you're going to get an agent that's going to email you this document or a document that looks like this, and they're going to expect you to give them some type of compensation. There's nothing that says that you have to give them any compensation, but just remember, it's going to also happen to you. And that's why I say you've got to have very clear communication with your buyers at first, so they understand that they owe you. I can honestly see this going, if this goes through all the way, I can see where brokerages might start to collect a deposit on a commission, or they might say, if you choose to get out of this agreement, you owe us a minimum of blank. I can absolutely see that happening, because that's the only way you're going to have a buyer have skin in the game, that they're not going to stray.
But then you as the broker, are you gonna enforce that?
And that's the thing, if you get it up front, what, you don't have a choice. Like, if you want to work with me, and that's where it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, because some agents in this room might be like, yeah, absolutely, Rich, please get that in writing to where you have to put a minimum $2,500 deposit down to work with a Keller Williams agent. But remember, you all do your own business. So if we unilaterally make that decision, you might be very unhappy because you might say, I don't like that business decision and I don't want that in place. I'm going to go to a different brokerage. So that's the problem, is the more strict we get, the more it can help, but the more it can also hurt, because you're independent contractors and can choose to run your businesses how you want. Holly?
I like that idea, but at the same time, it's not gonna be the next earnest deposit that's not worth anything either, and just muddies up, like.
Well, it could be. I mean, we're hypothetically talking right now, but I would say it's very simple. You don't show somebody a house until you have the $2,500.
Right, but then things go wrong, you know, they want out.
Oh.
Send email, and you have to return the money.
But you wouldn't return the money. That's what I'm saying. The money would be a non-refundable. You're either buying a house with me, and if you don't buy a house with me, you're not getting the money back. It's just gone. Yeah. It could become an industry standard. That's what I'm saying, is we can't collude, obviously, at brokerages, but if one starts doing it, others may start doing the same thing. That's why I say to you, this is a time where it's kind of like the wild, wild west all of a sudden. That's what's really happening. I mean, they're taking us back to like the late 80s, early 90s, before there was buyer agency and listing agency. It was when we all represented the seller. And so this is not a great thing for consumers. I think we can all agree to that. But unfortunately, that's why I say you pay attention to what's going on, get these signed, and then bring us the data that you're getting from the consumer. Like, what are they signing it? Are they not signing it? Do they like something? Do you see something in somebody else's that you like that maybe we can put one together that is better for us? If you have ideas, I would say mastermind around it, bring it to the brokerage and see what we can do to put it together. The job for us is to make sure that we're protecting your income and make sure we're protecting the consumer. That's our job, and getting them the house that they want. So you are going to have just as much input on this as anybody else's. We do have one of our sister brokerages at Living. They've met with an attorney, and the attorney basically said, I think you're meeting a little too prematurely. I know nothing more than you do, and I can't do anything for you. So after July, or when the Department of Justice finalizes this, we'll get together. So for now, business as usual and use this. So, all right. So then lines 14 through 17 basically just say that, again, realtor is a registered trademark. They're using realtors in here for a reason, because this was written by Ohio realtors. You may see others rather that don't say realtor. They may say real estate agent, simply because not every licensee is a realtor. That's a registered trademark. And so you'll see licensed people, but not realtors, using real estate agent. The term is not interchangeable like people think that it is. You're either a realtor or you're a real estate agent. And this just says what the duties of the agent are to the consumer. Okay. And then what are the duties of the buyer? I love it because it's a lot bigger. It says, what are the duties of the buyer? So it just says that the buyers agrees to use the brokerage and agent exclusively in buyer's search for a property. Now, the nice thing is later in this, it does say that it can also be somebody else from the brokerage. So if you're going on vacation or you're doing something else, this is giving permission, the buyer is giving you permission to say, yes, you can use somebody else from your brokerage if you're unavailable. It doesn't break our agency relationship or buyer agreement. And then it does say in here that the buyer understands the possibility of dual agency. We do practice dual agency at this brokerage. Not all of them do. And I will say, depending upon what happens after July with the Department of Justice, nobody may be practicing dual agency, right? And the reason I say that is simply because we don't know if I'm the listing agent and I start being a dual agent all the time and charging 3% commission, and that becomes an industry standard, you're going to start seeing lawsuits from buyers pop up thinking that I was representing them as the buyer's agent, or they didn't understand that they didn't have representation. Now you're going to have it all documented, but that's why I say we're going backwards, back to the 90s or pre, because buyers didn't have representation. Buyers want representation. They want you to represent them. So this is just letting them know that you could be a dual agent. So for now, we can use this form and it's great. If something changes, we'll have to get it updated, or Ohio Realtors would update this particular one. Show of hands, how many of you just simply choose not to practice dual agency? So a good group of you.
Sellers chose the wrong offer.
Just out of curiosity, because even though we allow it, there are some agents that absolutely say they won't do it. So just out of curiosity.
Hey, Rich.
All right. And then the compensation. So this is the biggest part of what we're here for today is how are you going to get paid? So again, to Diana's point, the biggest thing to remember on here is you don't want to put a number on here that you are not going to accept. If you're not going to accept that you're only getting paid $2,000, don't put $2,000 on there. You have to decide as a business owner, what is the minimum amount of commission that you are willing to accept based on what the buyer is looking for? Is the buyer looking at a $100,000 house? Are they looking at a $300,000 house? What's their time frame? How long am I going to be working with them? It's not all about the price of the house. It's about how long you're going to be working with them. What are you putting into it? And what are their expectations of you? You have to go to home inspection, right? You have to do all kinds of things, talking to the appraiser, getting the appraiser in if you're on the listing side. If you're on the buy side, you're going to the inspection. So make sure you're filling that buyer in on all of the things that you're doing for them and have a list of services that you provide. I think that Amanda sent out one where there were like 180 things that a Keller Williams agent can do for you. If you didn't see that, get it from her. You can edit it as you need to, but I highly encourage you to make one for your team or yourself as an agent. Mike? Oh yeah, definitely put it in your buyer packet. Mike?
Do you see that becoming an itemized thing? It's $50 a showing, it's $100 for an offer, it's.
I bet there are some brokerages that will go ahead and start doing a service checklist and they'll like charge you per line item. So if I obviously going to an inspection, maybe I charge you $100. If I have to schedule the inspections for you, I charge X. If I have to provide comps to the appraiser, I'm going to charge this. If I have to show your family the house because now you want them to come, it's an additional showing fee. Sure, I can see that. I don't know that I recommend that, but I can definitely see brokerages doing it.
You get paid $50 to show a house, how much of that goes to the brokerage?
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
So for the commissions, it can vary per buyer, so we can change that amount. It doesn't have to be uniform across the board. Okay.
Commissions have always been negotiable and they will continue to be. So my recommendation is, like I said, find out what is the minimum that you're willing to work for. That's the question you have to ask yourself. Holly had a question and then. No. So in our listing agreement, we have a 35% minimum. I have never enforced that because again, you have your own business. If you've chosen to do 2,500, that's fine. We might get to a point where we have to in order to remain profitable as a brokerage, but we haven't seen that yet. And you guys are all very good about knowing what your value is for the most part on charging a minimum. If I see you charging less than 2,500 or 3,500, it's typically because the house is a $20,000 tear down house. You're writing a contract or doing whatever. So we allow you to have that flexibility. Yeah. Eric? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Hang on, Eric. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So if they can email us and cancel the agreement.
Yep. We'll get there.
Okay,
Yep.
so couldn't they, if we had a different commission, we had 2.5% down, couldn't they email us to cancel that original agreement and then rewrite another agreement at 3%?
I suppose they could, but you're going to let them out of that, I guess would be the question.
Well, like she said, if the sellers are offering 3%, can we change it that way, have them email us and then we write it?
I suppose that'd be a great loophole is if they cancel one agreement and then start another one, it would be the same as withdrawing a listing with release and then relisting the property under a different listing agreement. I suppose. I don't know that I'd want that getting out there though. I mean, I don't know that I'd want consumers knowing that they could email me, get out of one agreement only to get into another agreement that's a lesser value. I think.
Well, I'm talking about if it's higher, like, because she was saying.
Oh, if it's higher?
Yeah, like if they're offering 3% and we had 2.5% in the agreement.
I'm gonna be able for that because the next thing you're gonna see is people want a kickback and they want that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what is already starting to happen is you're seeing agent or buyers that are saying, well, I've heard this agent's willing to give 1% of their commission towards my buying, towards my closing costs or whatever. What are you going to do? I think that you're going to find agents, to your question. I think you're going to find agents of all calibers doing all kinds of things to keep business and get busy. I would just ask the question, how long do you expect to be in business and what are your practices? Because if you're the agent that's going to be constantly undercutting your own commission, I'm really not sure how long you're going to be able to stay in business, is what I would say. But to get more commission, I do understand what you're saying there. And again, to Holly's point, then at that time, they might say, well, you're getting more commission than we originally agreed to. Why don't I get a credit for that? So I think that's a slippery slope too. But good observation in question. Eric?
Can you put like 2.5% commission with a minimum of 2,000?
You can put a minimum. We'll go over that. Yep, it's not less than. Mhm.
It's set in stone.
Yep.
That's the minimum.
Yeah, so line 27 says that the buyer shall pay a brokerage flat fee of, and this is where you can put the 295 or you don't have to put the 295. I say that simply because you should be charging the 295. If not, you know that you get charged for it. But if you chose to include that plus blank percent in there, that's up to you. So it's however you want to present them to the consumer. But my recommendation is, and I think Melissa Sanford had originally asked me that question, and I would say put the 295 in this box here and then plus whatever the additional commission is. So if it's 3%, then I would put it there. I'm sorry, I think there's a few chats. Let me see if I can catch up here.
Charge just a flat
can't.
fee and not a percentage?
Yeah, you can charge a flat fee. I don't know. Get rid of this. Okay. So you could do a flat fee of, let's just say, I don't know, if you want to do $3,500. And then this would be a 0%. You could do that. But the thing is again, I think where I don't recommend charging the flat fee of blank unless you really know that there's a property that is not going to be offering any type of commission. And I say that because as we go through this on the next page, you can get paid by more than one person. You could get paid by the listing brokerage and you can get paid by the buyer. So if I just automatically accept $3,500 and that's the flat fee, then I may have cut myself out of some commission. So that's why I would say, in my opinion, I don't know why anybody right now should be changing their standard from being 295 to 3% or 2.5%, depending upon what property you're looking at. Why would we automatically start reducing our commissions just because the buyer's paying it? I wouldn't. So my recommendation to you is, and I can't tell you you have to do that, but that's what I would say is leave it at 3%, leave it at 2.5%. Unless you start to get a buyer that says, I'm only going to pay you a flat $5,000 and that's it. Well, then you have to decide, are you going to work with that person or not? Because if they're looking at a $400,000 house and they're very picky and you're spending all this time with them, is it only worth $5,000 of your time? Holly?
Do you know on average, like, does everybody charge $295 in our brokerage or some people not collecting that and paying?
So Holly's asking, does everybody charge the 295 or are there some agents that don't charge it and pay it? We have a very, like, I'll say a handful of agents that choose not to charge it and they pay it out of their own commission. Yeah.
So, you know, we've been using this and we've had our buyers pay us in regards to, they haven't had an issue with paying us, except for we ran into a situation where we had to reduce our commission by $100 to get the deal done. And the reason was because the bank didn't know about that amount, and so they weren't able to compensate for that difference of $100 for the buyer's finances. I guess really where my question is it now where we're gonna actually have to share it with the lenders, so that way they're aware, so they can make sure they're speaking the correct numbers?
Well, you're going to be sharing it with the title company for sure. So that leads into a whole different conversation, which is your escrow letter, which we typically see agents doing in the final hour of their deal, where you might start to see it happening in the very beginning because they need to get that over to the title company to let them know you need to add my commission on the buyer's side. So to answer the question, I would say the lender's going to have to know, the title company's going to have to know because it's got to be on the settlement statement. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. I know I'm happy to answer all your questions. I hope you guys are okay with this. We're not going to get very far. We'll get through it all and I'm happy to answer your questions, but I just want, we'll get through it, but go ahead.
So in theory, I would think the bank would need to see this before they can pre-approve somebody, because they don't know what you're agreeing to.
I don't know that they'll have to use it to pre-approve somebody, but certainly you're going to want to make sure that the buyer has the commission, the payment to pay you on top of their pre-approval. Absolutely. Yes.
According to yesterday, Fannie Mae, I always get them backwards, did say that if so, FHA only allowed you to have 6% concessions,
they will allow that to go above the 6% now to pay our commission.
Yeah, as
How
a,
far above?
I think it's a 9%, if I'm not mistaken.
Of course, buyer still has to qualify with
Yeah.
regards to income rate.
For those of you on Zoom, if you ask questions, I apologize. I've got Amanda's computer and the chat. I'm not used to this, so I would just say, just unmute yourself and ask the question. But Sandy saying, I'm very concerned about how buyers will be able to afford this. Can it be input on their loan? And as of right now, no, it can't be put on their loan. But to your point, the lenders, NAR is talking, they're talking to the lenders, they're talking to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to find out. But they are saying as a Band-Aid or a temporary fix right now that you can go up to 9% concessions on, I think it was VA and FHA, and 3% of that won't be considered for buyer concessions. It will be considered for agent getting paid. Yes. And we don't know if that's going to stay in place, if lenders are going to get to a point where they start letting you finance it in or not. Good.
I told my sister that's an appraiser, and I asked her, you know, what's gonna happen, because I know, I talked to lenders, if they're only going to lend on the real estate, they're not gonna. But my sister said, you know how like, the seller's concessions became the norm, or agent commissions have become, you know, like that's standards and that's customary. If that becomes the norm and customary that buyers are paying the agents, then it'll be fine with the appraisers. It's not like they're gonna cut it out because of, you know, if that becomes the norm, then.
Yeah, I mean, the price of the house is the price of the house when it comes down to the appraisal. I mean, they're not going to lend more.
With the appraisers are hired by the banks to, you know, like. Sometimes like closing costs get cut out or whatever, but like if it becomes customary and standard that everybody's putting it in their loan, then it'll be part of something that's like. They're not gonna.
It could be.
Because of that kind of thing.
It could be. Yeah, we just don't know what to expect. And some lenders might have different programs for that to happen and some might not. So it's hard to say. But anyway, so going back to the compensation here, so the 295 is something that you should be putting in there, and then whatever your minimum, whatever your commission is plus blank of the purchase price. Now on line 32, it does say that the buyer's purchase or acquisition occurs within blank calendar days of the end of this agreement. So you need to also figure out, well, what happens if the buyer buys something after this expiration date? So is it going to be within 30 days of this? That the buyer becomes, that you have become aware that the buyer has bought something and acquired real property during the time of the agreement. Are they going to pay you? Well, again, that is great that it's in here, but it's also the conversation to say, okay, you went out and bought it for sale by owner without me. I found out about it within 30 days of this agreement, or 45 or whatever we put in there. Now I expect you to pay me, and they're going to say, go pound salt. What's going to have to happen? The broker's going to have to sue them. And I don't know that that's going to happen. So it's great that it's in here, but it also doesn't guarantee that you're going to get that payment.
So my
Michael.
thought on that was that it was just if you get under contract, you don't have to do an extension of the agreement.
You don't have to do an extension if you've got the time in here, but again, it's also to the point of if they go buy something without you, they go out and buy it for sale by owner and they close on it within the 30 days or 45 days. You're still saying that you still want paid for that is what you're saying. The unfortunate part is you may not get paid for it. It just depends, but it is in there for you to do that extension of the agreement. Yes. And then the total compensation, to Diana's point of line 34, total compensation shall not be less than blank. So whatever that is, whatever the minimum amount of commission that you're going to work for, that's what you would put in here. So what is that? I don't know. That's for you to decide. And that's why I would say, you know, if you're looking at up to $200,000, maybe you have a scale. Maybe you and your team or you as an agent say, this is my minimum charge if I show houses between $0 and $100,000. My minimum commission is X. Maybe between 200 and 300, it's X. Maybe it goes off the time frame in which you're searching with that buyer. Maybe it's not just derived off the price. Maybe it's a service list that, like Mike is saying. We don't know what that's going to look like. If you have ideas, like I said, shout them out, bring them to us. We're happy to look at that, but I would say find out what that minimum is. Mike?
We were thinking about increasing it from what we have right now. Our fear was that if we increase it for one person compared to another person, does that get us into the slippery slope of it might have been a protected class on accident.
Mhm.
So I guess to that point, you're saying going like $100,000 house is X. How do we state that without it turning into a protected class, issue?
But don't we already do that?
Well, if you-
Go on listing appointment, sometimes it's 3%.
Yeah, it's 100% negotiable, so that's what I'm saying is, so in what Diana was saying, the reason that I'm discouraging it is because you're looking at taking less than what you agreed to just because it's an inducement into the sale. You're basically saying, in order to get the sale completed, I will take less because you can't afford to pay me, right?
Well, I'm just kind of more like saying where like we agreed at 2.5%, but they're offering 3 and now we don't get the 3, we only get the 2.5. That's kind of more of what I was saying.
But
we
that's
can't
why
take
I'm,
that other half.
you can't take the other, but that's why I'm saying, like, on the compensation, like, I understand that everybody wants to be paid and I get that, but that's my whole point, is to continue to say, if you undercut yourself, you have nobody to blame at this point other than yourself. How many times have you gone to show a property in the MLS that says that it's a 1% commission or a 2% commission, or it's a 4-3-1-2, whatever, I mean, and it goes on, and you're so discouraged. You now have the ability to control what you're going to get paid. And so if you start undercutting yourself, you have nobody to blame but yourself. And that's all I will say is, don't go to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm just so desperate that I let these people out of the agreement that they signed with me because they can't afford to do it. Well, you negotiated that up front. Like, that's the whole purpose of this, is negotiating it up front. So I think, to me, to Mike's point, whether you get the lender involved, the title company, whoever it is, make sure that buyer has that money. And that's why I say, moving forward, we might have to get to a place where retainers are placed with brokerages so you get paid. Maybe the commission is paid up front, like an earnest money. And if you don't buy a house, but you've looked for 3 months, we keep X and give you back the balance. I don't know what that'll look like, but I can certainly see that being something in the future, because you want to get paid and you deserve to get paid. So whatever the total compensation is for you, just make sure that on line 34, whatever that is, that's what you're agreeing to and the buyer's agreeing to.
Can you change that to 1% since there's a dollar sign there?
I don't think you can change it to 1%. This is a copyrighted document, so unfortunately you can't change anything.
If they're looking at 250 to 350, like, how could you know that?
Well, if they're looking at 250 to 350, again, if
But they
it's,
find a 450.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great observation.
That's only 3% on everything
Yeah,
it's saying,
same,
because I
same.
feel like.
Because what's gonna happen,
You're gonna do more work, we end up doing more work on lower price stuff half the time, you
Yep.
know?
so what's gonna happen in your scenario, let's say if you filled this out the way that we're describing. So let's just say you put in there $5,000 as your minimum commission, right? I can guarantee you a buyer is gonna come to you and say, yeah, I know on line 27, you said it was 2.5% of the purchase price, but you were willing to only take $5,000. So can't you just accept $5,000 on this $400,000 house and give me a credit back for the difference? You know that's going to happen. That's why I'm saying to you emphatically, don't undercut yourself. If it's a $450,000 house, or if you think you're showing them between 250 and 350, what is the minimum compensation that you are willing to accept? To me, I would go on the high end of 350, and I would say whatever that percentage is. Now, if they happen to buy a 450 house, then
But it
you're out.
says minimum, not.
It does say the minimum.
But it
And-
says right after, it doesn't say if, what's it say? If
It's not applicable if left blank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you.
Which is
negotiate
fine.
at the Top, that line's moved. You don't have to put anything.
But I can tell you, there's gonna be agents that are gonna say, I will work for this minimum amount, and a buyer will absolutely ask you for a credit.
Right.
Good.
Laughing over it.
No, it's fine.
I feel like something, we all need to realize that this is an opportunity to like kind of take back our profession and like everybody, I'm not saying coerce and everybody get together, standardize commissions or talk about commissions, but at least see our value and like, we have an opportunity to turn it around instead of like all these people that are driving us down into the ground and they'll do it for less, they'll do it for less. Like, this is a huge opportunity to like make up what's right in your mind for yourself, but.
Yep. Agreed.
I think just the fact that they gotta sign that first, that's gonna stop that phone call, says, hey, I need to see this property right now. If you can't do it, Hey, I need.
And that's the thing is we're all gonna be on the same playing field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's not gonna be like that, I'm gonna tell you now.
No, it may not be. All right.
Like, where's that, like, say they wanna see how right now.
It would probably be held in the non-interest bearing trust account at the brokerage, and there would have to be parameters around how they get it back. There'd have to be an agreement that our attorney would have to draw up in order to do that.
Like, are we gonna have like a deposit, like Stonegate has, so that they can do the mobile deposit, because they wanna see it right now, like, send the money?
I don't think we've gotten that far. I mean, look at how long it's been for a title company to get to that point, and we're just talking about this as coming up in July. I don't know that we have an answer to that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing on page 2, just to go over, so the payment obligation, you always want to check the box 1 if you can get away with it on line 40, which is buyer does consents to you accepting compensation from more than one party. And I say that because if you end up, Mike, I'm sorry, you're talking too much. Calling you out. Quiet. Marcy? Uh-huh. So, Mike's just got that deep voice that carries. Yeah. So I would say, again, check box 1. You should not have a reason that a consumer tells you that they don't want to consent to you getting payment from another party. Because if you can get 2.5% covered by the buyer, the listing brokerage, and they only have to pay you 5% or 0.5%, I think that they would be jumping for joy, right? So in my opinion, I don't know why you would ever check does not consent to the agent accepting more than one party from the payment from more than one party. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay, so we're all in agreement. Don't have to do that. All right, so this is the termination part. This is the part that says that the buyer or agent can terminate this agreement anytime by giving written notice to the other party. If the buyer terminates this agreement before the end of the term and the buyer purchases or acquires real property within the time frame on the described terms in section 5, the broker and agent shall be entitled, the brokerage and agent shall be entitled to the compensation amount. Again, this is where I go back to you and say, I don't know that we're going to sue the buyer for this. It says that that's what's going to happen in here, basically, that they owe us and they're obligated to do that. But unfortunately, I don't know what brokerage is going to start to enforce that. So what are your thoughts on termination? What would you guys like to see in a perfect world? What would that look like? Because you understand there's going to be a time where you're going to want to terminate an agreement with somebody, and there's going to be a time where they want to terminate an agreement from you. So you're okay with the way that this is written, just simply emailing and saying you can get out of it. But let's say, for example, the agent worked with somebody for 3 months. You were there at 10 o'clock at night when you're answering the phone, you're doing all these, right. And then all of a sudden they say, I don't want to work with you anymore. I'm going to go work with this person. You're good with saying, hey, I'm totally okay with that. Okay. Go ahead. They get a retainer.
Is that like, okay, so what if you have an agreement with them for 3%? And then something happens, let's just say that they attend an open house and you're not with them and you didn't know that they were gonna go to that open house. I usually pick up the phone and call and say, hey, my client's coming through. But if they just happen to see an open house and they go in, and then an agent is like, well, I'll do it for 2.5%. Like, if just email them and then, then you can do it with me and you can save some money.
So we don't know that open houses are still going to be a thing in the future, because we don't know if you have to get a buyer agency agreement signed before you can show real property. How do you hold an open house without getting every single buyer that walks in the door signing that document?
But those are unrepresented buyers.
No, they're not. You can't show a house. Yeah, the rule is right now you are exempt from getting a consumer guide signed because an open house is an exemption. There's nothing in the proposed rule right now that says an open house is an exemption for you not having to have a buyer agency agreement in place. So we don't know if open houses are going to be an exemption, or if I can't imagine them getting rid of open houses altogether, but I can also say I wouldn't have expected a lot of the things that are happening right now to be happening. So you might have to, if somebody wants to go to an open house, maybe perhaps they're going to require a registration. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm brand new.
Yep.
He says going forward that NAR did approve agents to have open houses, and it's the only spot that buyers are allowed to walk through a property without having a buyer agency agreement signed. I don't know if that's per state or whatnot.
Yep.
With that being said, though, he said, what I would suggest to all of you is that stop holding 2 to 4 open houses. Hold them from 2 to 6, so that that's the only place buyers can go without having to sign with another agent. Food for thought.
Nope, that's definitely food for thought. And I would say for NAR, that could be accurate. And the concern there is it is only those members that are realtors follow NAR. So the state of Ohio right now has House Bill 466, and I honestly have not read the whole thing. I don't know what's in there, but it's requiring all buyers to sign a buyer agency agreement with a licensee before they show a property. I don't know if there's an exclusion in there for open houses. I sure hope there is. I'll find out more tomorrow. Yep.
So like, but there's really nothing in there that says that they can't talk to another agent that says, hey, I'll do it for 2 or 2.5%. And then they just decide to.
Well,
Let that agent to save some money.
I mean,
Especially if they're tight on funds.
well, if you go up here to the duties of the buyer, they are supposed to, and understand, if you go to the very top of this, it says an exclusive buyer's agency agreement. Like, this is an exclusive agreement between you and the consumer. They're not supposed to be talking to other agents. That's the purpose of this agreement saying exclusive.
Yeah, they said they did it, signed it, you know, like people don't. I can see agents doing that though, because you're.
I can see agents doing that. There's, well, just like Diana just said, you know, you go into an open house and 2%, they'll do it for 2% or whatever. That's what I'm saying. It's going back to the Wild West, and the answer is we don't know what's going to happen when those things come up, because unless the brokerage is willing to sue the consumer over it, how do you go to another brokerage and say, you owe me X when I'm not procuring cause, I didn't show them the property, I didn't write the offer on the property, even though I worked with them for the last 3 months. Oh, and by the way, there's nothing in writing that says you owed me a referral. How do you do that? And there's nothing in the agreement that obligates another brokerage to pay you.
Aren't we losing sight of, though, the fact that sellers are still gonna be paying commission?
Sellers are most likely still
And
going to
so
be paying
my
a commission.
tip Would be, this is just in case a house you choose isn't offering a commission.
You don't want to do that, because the Department of Justice right now is trying to make it so that you can't offer buyer agent commission. It's
I
not,
thought it was just not in the MLS.
that is what we agreed to for NAR in the lawsuits. The Department of Justice just came out last Friday. This is totally separate, saying that they don't think that NAR went far enough with the lawsuits, and they are trying to make it where you cannot pay as a seller a buyer's agent.
Isn't that interfering more than what they said the whole colluding is basically saying that?
Well, the Department of Justice did something with us they've never done before, which is reneged on the agreement that we had signed probably 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the only time in history that's ever happened. So it's also the Department of Justice. So I would say call your local senator or your congressperson, and you can sit down and have a chit chat with them. I don't know there's nothing we can do about it. So, but anyway, so the termination of it, I can see all of your points I don't have the answer, is to say, could you not get out of an agreement, canceling this one, signing a new one, for more commission or less commission? I absolutely see that as a loophole.
Is there any other industry that's just lax with contracts? Like, oh, well, you know what I mean? Like if we have it, but we can just personally, it's like, oh, okay, no, I'm just gonna.
No, not that I know of. I mean, that's the thing. When you go to an attorney, the attorney doesn't say all of a sudden, oh, you can't afford to pay me. That's okay. I'll just write that off. You're going to get on a payment plan with them. Right? I mean, and that's a great question too. That's a great thing too. So like commercial property, if you guys haven't sold commercial property, I want to be respectful of your time. What do we start to? So we got to get done in the next 27 minutes. On commercial property, a buyer's broker is allowed to put a lien against the property when a contract is entered into, and then that obligates the seller to pay them at the closing. And if they don't, the lien, can't be cleared because title is not going to transfer it. We could get to that point too, where we are starting to put liens against the properties.
If they can't pay for a buyer,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yep.
It's not a bad idea to look at like an investment that you're gonna get it back at some point,
It's possible.
if they don't.
all of these things are possible. What, do we know what's gonna happen? No, but that's why I'm saying, like, this is a scary time, but it's also an exciting time. There's opportunities for you to make money still. There's an opportunity for you to control what you're making as long as you're being smart about it and not letting people just out of a contract to let them out of a contract. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's like in your school.
I think a lot of this will be solved if they do retainer fee, because, you know, if you have a retainer fee, you go to an open house, they're still your client, you retain them. and you take a
yeah,
loan.
I mean, how many in this room would be in favor of a retainer fee? A good amount, right?
As a whole, there's gonna be a lot of agents not saying, hey, no retainer fee here, so.
That's the whole thing is it creates competition. It absolutely creates competition. But that's the other thing too, is you either, you know, to your point, Holly, you either want to be known as the brokerage and the profession that is, or the professional that is professional. This is what you do for a living and you take it seriously, or you can be the willy-nilly, just whatever, anything goes.
Enough of us need to do that and have
We all need
that
to take it, girl.
energy.
Let's do it.
Because that will inspire the rest of us. We're the only ones, you know, trying to change our industry and make it
Well,
better.
so
It's
so
not
I-
100% our
I think that's great. Let me ask you this question as you're saying that though, Holly. It was my idea originally that in January of this year, I was going to mandate that you all had to use this buyer agency agreement on every single buyer that you had. How many of you would have stoned me to death because it wasn't mandatory by the state and we were the only brokerage requiring it in Stark County? How many agents would have left the brokerage because of it, perhaps because they didn't want to do it? Right? So we made the decision to say, we're going to teach you on how to do it, but we're not going to require it. Now the state's requiring it, so we're all in the same boat. So when I say that to you, is I'm saying is what we think might be good for everybody could also be a detriment to the way that people want to do their business. So if we're the only brokerage that's charging a retainer fee, those other brokerages could say, we're not charging a retainer fee, come on over to us. If we make our agreement more exclusive than being able to terminate in writing, you're going to have the perfect example. Look at how many teams, large teams, the two largest teams we have here in Stark County, one of them being at our own brokerage, has an easy exit listing agreement. You went out for any reason, even if we took pictures of your property and did all these things, easy exit, you're out of it, done, we release you. Right? You're going to have agents that are going to say the same thing. If I don't prove my value to you and you don't want to work with me, here's an easy exit. Now you as the other person have to say, I now have to sell this somehow to say, I am going to drag you through the mud. You're staying in this relationship with me no matter what. Good luck. That's all I can say. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. Go ahead, Mike.
And I know this, but how realistic of a threat do you think it is that some tech giant that already sells buyer leads to agents creates some sort of app that effectively makes this Uber drivers where someone says, hey, I want to see XYZ house and I'm offering $50 or whatever.
Yeah, I think hypothetically, we can talk about lots of different hypotheticals. I can definitely tell you that AI is here to stay and it's going to make many jobs obsolete or help you with your job, but it's also going to make it so that you're not doing your job to the full ability of what you used to do. I mean, just as an easy example to answer your question is, anybody that was around, and I was on the very cusp of this, the MLS book that was like that thick, that was this big, that got delivered to all the brokerages instead of the online MLS. It's progress. I mean, sadly, it's progress. And so we didn't get paid more to go pick up a key when there was no lockbox or look through this big book to find out that the listing had gone under contract a week ago.
We did 7% back then.
Well, it's only gone down from there. It was 7%. But you did have things to do in your job that were more difficult back then than you do now, is what I'm saying. You didn't have dot loop, so you were going out and getting things signed. You're right. We were absolutely worth the money. We're still worth the money, but we have to prove it.
Now, putting each other out and being so vicious as 24 years ago when I got into those, absolutely not the way this business is.
Well, and again, that's why I say to you, think about this for a minute. For those true professionals here at Keller Williams and any other brokerage, we have 1.6 million licensed realtors in the entire country. What happens if that gets down to like 800 to 900,000? Do you think you're gonna have more professionals in the business? Do you think that you're gonna be able to show your value more and get more money and control what you're making when you don't have those people that are unprofessional and undercutting you? I do. It's gonna be a while, but I absolutely can see to where in 3 years from now, we have weeded out the people that are unprofessional, unethical, and or just want to undercut everybody. Because they're not going to be able to afford to stay in the business. Yeah, you're always going to have 1, 2 people that you don't like and always wonder how they have business. But I think you're going to see over a period of time that you're going to find more professionals in here with less throat cutting. So just an observation. All right, consent to delegation. This is lines 47 through 50 that just say that you're allowed to assign another agent within the brokerage, and that they can continue to work. This agreement is not null and void. They continue to work with you. And then consent to disclose, buyer's consent to agent disclosing to seller and seller's agent information regarding the buyers, including the identity, job history, credit, anything like that. Any question that's asked, basically from the listing agent, you should be able to disclose unless they tell you otherwise, right? So this gives you permission to do that instead of having to call the buyer and say, do I have your permission to do this? You have it up front, okay? And then lines 56 through 63 is just saying that the buyer acknowledges and agrees that the purchase or lease of real property encompasses a lot of different professional disciplines. And while the agent possesses considerable knowledge, you don't have all of the knowledge, meaning that you're not responsible for the home inspector that's chosen, that you didn't choose them, that you are not responsible for them not finding something. Whether it's something on the property that you're unaware of, whether it's hazardous material, or anything like that. Again, you have limited scope, and that's for selling the real estate. So this, to me, I will tell you, in Michigan, they use these on a regular basis. We've spoken to other Keller Williams brokers up there. This agreement has helped them head off lawsuits like you can't imagine, because the brokerage will get a letter that says that you're being sued for this, for an inspection or whatever. And they provide this signed document, and it stops it right then and there, because the buyer understood what the agent was supposed to do and what they were supposed to do and what the agent didn't have control over. So very good for you to point these things out. And you should be going through this. Like, you should read this, learn it, be able to go through it, just like you can go through the consumer guide of the purchase agreement. Well, it is negotiable, but I will tell you again, this document is copyrighted by by Ohio Realtors. You do not have the ability to cross out and add things and do things. This is copyrighted for a reason. They didn't want changes on it, right? So yeah, it's copyrighted. So you're not going to be using this, ripping it off and duplicating and making your own, like you're using this one. Now there's additional terms. You can add things, but crossing things out, I really don't know what you'd be crossing out in here at all.
You have like the email part, but consensus, that's what we do.
I mean, I suppose you could, but again, you don't want to work with a buyer that doesn't want to work with you. You don't want to work with somebody that you have to drag kicking and screaming. Right.
Do I have ones that, would.
You don't have shady people. Nobody has that. I know, I'm kidding.
It's more what we found as an industry. Well, agents, of course, they're like, talk people into, hey, just send an email. Yeah.
Sure they will.
Absolutely gonna have this.
Yeah, they will. Absolutely. And then line 64 through 78, basically, it just says the dispute resolution. So we don't have this in our purchase agreement, which we should be adding. But it just says that what is going to happen if there is a dispute as far as getting payment and an agreement to this. So if they didn't cancel the agreement, but they bought a house with somebody else and they still owe us a commission, we do agree to go to mediation, and the mediation has to be in the county in which we're located in. And the mediator shall be mutually agreed upon between the parties. And it could be a retired judge or justice, an attorney, professional with at least 5 years of residential real estate experience, which is really good for us. So it doesn't mean that somebody's just never going to pay you, and it doesn't mean that they can just get out of it to get out of it. There is a dispute resolution that we have to follow, and they're agreeing to it, so we could enforce it. Again, it's only as good as we're willing to enforce. So that's what I would say to you. Ginger, thoughts? Yeah.
I'm gonna make them write me a check up front.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep,
I
go
have a
ahead.
question.
So when it comes time to July, I personally would feel more comfortable if it was an exclusive agency agreement through Keller Williams, not Ohio Realtors. So at least the branding of all the documents look.
So there's different thoughts about whether it should be Ohio Realtors or Keller Williams or Remax or whoever. So the liability becomes on Ohio Realtors, attorneys and Ohio Realtors when we use their forms. We don't rely on it being our liability at Keller Williams. I'm not telling you that we aren't going to write one. Like I said, I will happily take your feedback. We haven't made that decision yet. But we then bear that liability and lawsuit in the event that there's a problem with the document as opposed to Ohio Realtors or NAR or anybody else. So, well, sure. I mean, the more claims we have, the more our E&O insurance goes up. So E&O would much rather us use Ohio Realtor or NAR forms than our own forms. Yes. Yep, absolutely. All right. And then property condition and indemnification. This kind of goes along with our purchase agreement. It just says, again, your scope of knowledge is for the real estate. It is not being an inspector. You're putting them on notice that any test they want to do is up to them, any inspections, but it is not your knowledge or the brokerage knowledge to have that information for them. And if it was disclosed, any defects, it's on the property disclosure form. Okay. So additional provisions, you can write something in there. You know, if you have something that you want to write, I would say be careful. We're not attorneys. Don't pretend to be an attorney, because if you get called on the carpet for who wrote something in there and sounded like an attorney, that can be a problem. We have plenty of agents that pretend to be attorneys and write addendums that are terrible. So you don't really want to do that. And that this is the entire agreement. You're not writing a separate addendum to it. This is the agreement, right? There's nothing different on a page 4 that doesn't exist. This is 3 pages. If it is included in this, it better be written somewhere in this or all the way down here at the bottom. It is 3 pages and that's it. That's the entire agreement. And then the fair housing statement, this is the same as it is in our purchase agreement, our listing agreement. And then it just goes on to say that wire fraud is obviously on the rise. Don't give out your information. So we had a lot of questions. Hopefully this was helpful that you guys, I know that the document itself doesn't lend everything that you're looking for, but it really does give you good talking points with your consumer. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Yes, Ginger?
I could go all day.
Yep, that's okay.
I was just looking at our exclusive right. Could we slide in there just like the exclusive right says? And I always point out to my sellers, this is a legally binding agreement. Just that sentence alone.
I think that,
It's under note.
I was gonna say, I think it's on here.
Above line.
Yeah, this is a legally binding agreement established an exclusive agency relationship between buyer and agent and establishing buyer's obligations to compensate agent. If buyer does not understand this agreement, buyer should seek the advice of an attorney. So you can highlight it. Yeah, go ahead.
So, and this is, I know that there's no like perfect answer to this question, but, I work with a lot of like VA buyers and FHA buyers. And so if they come to me and they say, okay, we have enough for closing costs and whatever down payment that they may or may not be responsible for. So they have, let's just say that they have $5,000 and then, that's enough to get them into a house. But then they say, we don't have any extra.
So,
Because I've had people that are just scraping to get what they need just to get to closing. And then on top of that, I'm gonna be asking them for a 3% commission. How do you propose that we advise a consumer or a buyer that's in that position?
so the only answer that we have right now is that you would have to negotiate in the purchase agreement to get paid by the seller in the form of concessions. I know that that NAR is working with the department, the Veterans Affairs Department, to figure this out because we all know that 6% is the highest amount of concessions you can get. To Ginger's point earlier, they're working with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to see if we can get up to 9% as long as it's not including the other additional percent on top of the 6 will not be considered buyer concessions necessarily. It's for paying the buyer's agent. So hopefully they're working on that, and by July, we will have something worked out. But there is nothing anywhere that says that you cannot work with your buyers, whether they're VA, FHA, or anything, that if you have this agreement and they agree for you to write in the purchase agreement that you can get paid by the seller through the purchase agreement, you can absolutely do that. So whether you have a conventional buyer that says, yeah, I'm willing to pay you $10,000, but I'm not really going to pay it to you. You have my permission to negotiate that in the purchase agreement. And that's what you do under additional terms. You can absolutely still get paid that way. So that's my recommendation for now.
Dude, could you write that in under additional terms that I will?
Yep. You could absolutely, under additional terms on this buyer agreement, that buyer is giving me buyer's agent permission to write in $10,000 commission to be paid by the seller. Absolutely. Our ethics have not caught up with this rule yet, just so you're aware. It is prohibited right now that you make any kind of contingency on your compensation in the purchase agreement, right? So just be careful with how you're doing that. If you say to the buyer, well, I'm not going to present your offer, or I'm not going to write your offer because you're not giving me permission to put that $10,000 in there, or the buyer says all of a sudden, well, the seller won't agree to your extra $10,000. Guess you just work for me for free. And you say, well, guess what? I'm not going to write the offer or do this. That's a problem with your ethics. You can't do that.
I cannot remember what brokerage it was, but on my listing, on one of the purchase agreements that was sent to me, it had their it was just like a regular one. Yeah. It was, I think it's.
It has what?
Has the buyer's commission, buyer agent commission in the purchase agreement.
Yeah. So Howard Hanna's purchase agreement has always had the commission in there. And I will just tell you the answer that I've given for all the years is the attorneys that we work with on a regular basis, and you'll notice it's the only one that has it. I think there's one Remax that also has it. A purchase agreement is between a buyer and a seller. It has nothing to do with the agents, zero to do with the agents. The agents are there to work on behalf of the consumer, filling that out. But the agreement is between the two of them. The compensation belongs in the listing agreement and in the MLS, because the MLS was the contract in which agents get paid. The listing agreement was the contract between the seller and the listing brokerage. Where we've got a problem on our hands, and I'll be very frank, I think that a lot of agents, and hopefully none in this room, but when you're explaining how commission worked, you could have been part of the problem. Because if you've ever said that the seller pays the buyer's broker commission, you're wrong. You've been wrong. You stated the wrong thing. And unfortunately, that's part of the mess that we're in. A listing agent or brokerage always procures the 100% of the commission. You negotiated that with the seller. What the listing agent did with that was nothing through the seller. The seller didn't need to know where it went. If I procured 7%, that's what you're paying me. That's what you agreed to. What I do with half of that or a quarter of it or whatever is none of your business. You agreed to this. Now, if I give away 3%, or 3.5%, that was the listing brokerage paying the buyer's broker. That is what happens. That's why the MLS was designed with the blanket compensation, so everybody knew what that was. And that was the contract if you belong to the MLS. Where I think we've gone, a problem is we've gotten lazy as an industry, and we've allowed the title company, because we wanted paid faster out of selfishness. When I represent the buyer, I don't want the title company writing a check to Howard Hanna and it taking 3 days to get over there, or however long it takes, and then waiting for Howard Hanna to write a check to Keller Williams so that I can get paid as an agent. That's really what should be happening, just so you're aware. That is the normal process of things. Title companies, as a convenience, have split the commission however we've told them to, and given the buyer's broker the commission and the listing broker the commission. What does that look like on a settlement statement? That looks like on a settlement statement, I as the seller just paid the buyer's broker a commission. I didn't. I paid the listing broker a commission, but if you look at the title document, it says Keller Williams this, Howard Hanna this. So what does the seller think? I just paid it. Perfect way to have a lawsuit, and that's what happened.
Couldn't they change the way their settlements?
Well, I think it's a little bit late for that.
Well, yeah.
I think it's a little bit late. We should have never done it that way. And anytime a buyer's agent says, well, they were offering their services for free. That was another problem. Buyer's agent said, oh, you don't pay me. I work for free. No, you didn't. You got paid. You've never seen that? Oh my gosh, I've seen. Oh yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure you've seen. So I will just tell you, as an industry, we've done this to ourselves. I'm not excited about it, but we've done this to ourselves. Any questions? Other questions? Okay, so much excitement. I don't even know what to do as I spit all over the place.
Hey,
Yes, we
Rich.
can do some masterminds, and I would highly encourage you guys, as you're using this buyer's agreement, if you're finding things that your buyers don't like or you don't like, start taking notes. Let's do a mastermind once a month to figure out what you're liking, what you're not liking, and best practices.
Should line one be Keller Williams?
How we, if everything is.
So the listing agreement's going to change, and one of the biggest changes in there is we have to put basically in bold black letters that say commission is negotiable and is not set by law. So we have to add that to our listing agreement. And we will also probably be changing the way that buyer's agent's commission is spelled out in there because it might be zero.
Talking about like creating some big advocate group for realtors like this news, it's all of this that.
Scott Kelly yesterday, something about a congressman.
No, we're going, the treasurer is coming to the board, but that's not gonna happen. We do have realtors at the Rotunda tomorrow, which is where we're gonna talk about all the House bills. There is a lot of realtors going in, and I mean, to answer your question, Holly, is to say, you are all part of NAR. It's the biggest lobbying, it's the #1 trade association in the entire country, if you didn't know that. It's the #1 lobbying organization in the entire country. So what I would say to you is get involved with NAR. You're paying dues. Get involved with your legislators, get involved with your board, because there are things that you do as a real estate professional or as a realtor that you don't even know that you're doing. You are helping consumers with trying to get their property taxes reduced. You are trying to help with getting their property taxes to where it's adjusted every 3 years instead of going back 1 year, it's going on an average of 3 years. You have helped extend the flood insurance, and if it wasn't for that, people wouldn't be able to sell their homes on the coast or in floodplains and different things like that. There is so much advocacy that real estate realtors do. Get involved. So when you say, is there a new one? There's not a new one.
Yeah, I just like, in my personal opinion, that NAR kind of failed us or like, fell, you know, like.
I don't know I mean, there are a lot of people that,
The leadership.
there are a lot of people that say the NAR may have failed, but I will say this. I don't know that there are enough out of 1.6 million realtors paying attention to what the hell's going on. I'll be very honest at NAR, at the level of that. NAR leadership, I agree, Mike, has failed us with the things that happen. But they didn't cover their butt when it came to protecting all of us. They protected every single agent in this room and this brokerage from being bankrupt by getting sued. So they did protect us. The people they didn't protect are the companies that were over $2 billion in revenue. And really the biggest one is Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And that's because their ownership said they will never settle. NAR left it open for the people over $2 billion to also settle and get protected. It's up to those companies like Howard Hanna and Berkshire if they want to settle. They don't have to. So I understand how people can say that they failed us on one sense, and perhaps they did, but they protected us in a lot of ways. And they've done amazing things. Like I said, if you look into all the things that the 30-year mortgage was never a thing. Who did that? It was realtors. Realtors said there needs to be a better way for people to pay for their homes, and they advocated for the 30-year mortgage fixed rate. We got it. That's why we have that. Yeah.
Everyone else is 15-year mortgage.
15-year, 30-year mortgage is something that the US has that other countries don't have. And the other thing I would say to you too is talk to other real estate professionals in different countries. Believe it or not, this is still the best country to own, buy, and sell real estate because of your profession. It takes months to buy and sell a home in other countries, and it's not a fair process. So for everything that's wrong with what NAR and OR and anybody else does, there are great things that they do too.
Yeah, you may, our dues have to go up. I know the state.
Yeah, there's.
Like, we can pay out 480 billion in 4 years, so,
Yeah.
like.
Oh, I'm sure our dues are going to go up. But I can also see over the next few years, mergers and acquisitions of local boards changing the fee structure. And I can also see local boards maybe going away and we only have a state association. And remember, if the MLS doesn't have our commission in it, are we going to be looking for different ways to find it and not be paying the MLS? I don't know.
I was reading, the proposed settlement, and it said that members of NAR cannot, start their own MLS. I did read that.
Members of NAR, that's probably true. I mean, they have MLSs now and they're trying to get rid of them. Yeah, our MLS is not owned by NAR, by the way.
It was. But
Art-
I was gonna ask a separate question about like how these different larger, the 2 billion plus revenue, what did Gary Keller, what was his?
Well, I don't know. We settled before it
Did we
got to
settle?
that
Okay,
point.
I couldn't remember if that was.
Yeah, we settled before, and the companies that make over $2 billion a year, remember, we don't. This is a franchise model. We did not make
Oh,
over $2
that's
billion. Howard Hanna's not a franchise. Berkshire Hathaway does have franchises, but they also have companies
So we
that
were
they own.
protected by the-
We were protected under the laws, under NAR and under, yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
So with Berkshire Hathaway, aren't they like the arbitration clause with the Supreme Court?
They're fighting. They said that they're not gonna settle.
I mean, if they would be successful, I mean, I guess that's more of their monetary settlement, like the practices are probably still gonna change anyway.
Well, the practices are gonna change if you're a member of NAR, and if you're not a member of NAR, they're still gonna change in Ohio. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
So if they.
Go ahead. I'll stick around to ask what you can answer.
So say Berkshire Hathaway, they settle and, or they are able to change anything, changes